Before we go through the lesson today, I want to talk about the purpose of the bell ringer. I'll put it back up on the screen. So I had you come up with a list of 3 rules you had to follow at school. So maybe you talked about not running in the hallways or not having your cell phones out, no bags in class, things like that. Behind rules, there's a purpose. And I didn't ask this question, but I'll ask it now. Why do we have these rules? Why shouldn't we run in the halls? Why shouldn't we have our cell phones? Why no bags or backpacks in class? And there's different reasons. For the running in the hall, we could say it's a safety issue. For the no phones, we can say it's a distraction, therefore you're not learning. For the bags or the backpacks in class, or even in the hallways, because they're supposed to be in your locker, again, it's a safety issue. So behind rules, there are principles or reasons why we have rules. And if you think about it, in school, a lot of the rules, the guiding principle behind it is safety and making sure you're learning and not getting distracted. Same thing about sports. It doesn't really matter the sport you picked. I'll take soccer. In soccer, you can't trip, you can't touch the ball with your hands, and you can only have 11 players on the field at a time. A lot of times with sports, the principles or the reasons why we have rules in sports is safety again. That's common with schools. Also, we could say to make it fair. So each team has a fair shot at winning the game. These are principles. The Constitution, which we're going to really start digging in with this unit, also has principles behind it. We're going to begin to look at those principles. First one, there's 5 of them total. Some of these I've mentioned in class, some of them I have not. Number 1 is popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty simply means people are the source of power. So I'll say this another way. The government gets its power through the people. And you might think, well, how are we powerful? How do we show our power? When I think of the president's way more powerful than I am. How are we the source of the power? There's different ways, but the most obvious way that shows we are the source of power for the government is through voting. And I've asked this question to a couple classes. So if we all agreed Joe Biden is the most powerful person in the United States because he's president, the next question we ask is, how did Joe Biden become president? And that was through us voting for him. So thus, the citizens are giving the power to Biden. And you could say, well, let's say we don't like Biden again, or we don't like Biden anymore. How can we take away his power? Well, it would be the next election. We don't vote for him, and we vote for his opponent. Separation of powers. We've spoken about this already. I maybe haven't used the term separation of powers, but you should know these. Power within our government is divided into 3 different branches. And we should know these, but let's get it down regardless. We have the legislative branch, which is Congress. We have the executive branch, which is President and the White House. And then we have the judicial branch, which is the courts. The power is divided between these 3 branches, and it's supposed to be divided equally. So that one branch doesn't have more power than the others. Checks and balances. I brought this up a little bit. Checks and balances is the idea that each branch has the power to watch or limit the actions of others. What I mean by this, if some branch, pick a branch, doesn't matter, does something wrong or does something they're not supposed to do, then the other branches, it's up to them to jump in and stop them and say, hey, executive branch, you cannot do this. The best example I could give for this is the executive branch. If the president does something illegal that he's not supposed to do, then the legislative branch, Congress, has the power to impeach him and attempt to remove the president from office. That's an example of checks and balances. There's others that we'll talk about later. Federalism. Haven't spoken about this topic yet. We'll spend some time at the end of the unit. Federalism is the idea that power is divided between national and state governments. I think a lot of times you think the national government is this super powerful thing and it dictates our lives, meaning it can tell us what to do all the time, every day, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not suggesting that the national government isn't powerful, because it is, but don't underestimate the state government. Don't underestimate Topeka and what happens in the state of Kansas. And I added on here, there are certain things only the national government can do, and the same for the states. And I'm not going to get into these yet. We'll do that later. I'll give you an example today. National government can only declare war. A state cannot declare war. A state government, here's a good example showing the state government has a lot of power over you. The reason you're sitting in this classroom today is not because the national government said you have to. It's because the state of Kansas has a law, I believe, that you have to be in school from ages 6 to 16. We're going to see that the national government has certain powers that only it can do. The state government has powers that only it can do. And then in the middle, there's shared powers, which means both the national and the state governments can do those things. Our fifth and final principle that we're going to speak about throughout the unit is individual rights. And this will actually be at the end and into next unit. But individual rights, it's kind of as it sounds. The Constitution protects our individual rights. And this primarily gets into the Bill of Rights. So, for instance, the First Amendment gives us freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Either the Fifth or the Sixth gives us a trial by jury, meaning if I'm put on trial and accused of a crime, a jury decides the outcome, not a judge. The Second Amendment says I have the right